Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to first ever Foundations Live. Good to see so many of you here, whether you're on the Foundations website or whether you're on one of our social media channels. Good to see you. I'm Paul, and as I said, this is Foundations Live. So if you haven't seen us before, we're Foundations. We're the national body for disabled studies grants and home improvement agencies in England, and we're funded by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, which we're here to help you with event training workshops, and you can find all the details at foundations.uk.com. If you're looking for closed captions, if you want those today, you can find those on both the feeds on LinkedIn and on YouTube. But you can also watch us on Facebook and on Twitter or X as well as the website. And any of your comments that you post either on the website or in any of those channels will also come straight through to here. So please feel free to kind of comment away. And so there's a couple of comments already. So Kelly, yes, we have started now, but if anyone else wants to put any comments in there, we can use them as we go forward. So good afternoon. Be good to, if you wanted to introduce yourself, that'd be fantastic. Our agenda for today, we're going to be talking about Better Care Fund, having a Better Care Fund update from Jane Lord first, from the Better Care Fund team. Then we're going to Plymouth, where Steve Evans is going to give us a bariatric adaptation case study. Then I've got Rachel Russell joining us, who's going to be introducing our summit for 2024. And then finally, I'll wrap up the afternoon by going through how you make DFG decisions. So that should take us through to a little bit after 3 o'clock this afternoon. And today I was going to announced all the roadshows, but apart from the one in Newcastle at the end of March, they're all now full. So I won't say very much about the roadshows other than the waiting list is available for Nottingham, Plymouth, Manchester and London, and we'll release extra tickets if we can. If we can get an extra table in, we'll release those as soon as we can, but there are a few tickets left for Newcastle. And the agenda for this round of roadshows is that we'll be looking at the design of bathrooms. We'll be looking at how you make, or where kind of DFGs fit in terms of, and perhaps not frailty is not the best term, but some places do DFGs kind of before a fall as a preventative measure, and some places very much kind of after a fall as a reactive measure. We'll be kind of discussing some of that as well around the roadshows. So looking forward to seeing lots of you when we hit the road next month. So that's enough of an intro from me. But I'm very pleased we've got Jane Lord here today, who's from SAFE, from the Better Care Fund team. Hey Jane, sorry, just surprise you then.
Write me up.
So Jane, over to you with a update on all things Better Care Fund.
Lovely. As always, thank you very much, Paul, and always very pleased to be joining Foundations to hear what's going on in the world of DFG and all the work that you're doing on that, and an opportunity just to give you an update on what's happening on the Better Care Fund. So thank you very much for inviting me. I also think there might be one or two Better Care managers on the call as well. I can only stay till 2:30, but my colleague Louise Steiger is also here, and she would be able to pick up any questions or get answers to any questions if they appear later on in the conversation. So I've jotted down a few things that I thought I would share with you. We finally got round to having our conferences, the Better Care Fund conferences in November. I hope that some of you were able to join us at the 3 venues that we had in London, Leeds and Birmingham. They were really well attended, and I was very encouraged to hear in a lot of the presentations that we had from local systems, we were had lots of speakers, to hear references to housing. and improvements to housing that made places suitable for people to carry on living their lives in. So that was very encouraging. So we had our conferences, which we'd hoped to have in March 2020, but that was when COVID struck, so we had to cancel them. So we're enjoying getting out on the road, which I know Foundations and DFG roadshows have got off to a quick start on that as soon as it was possible. What else is happening at the moment? We've reached the end of Q3 for the first year of the Better Care Fund of a 2-year plan. So Q3 returns are due in to cover October and December, and they're due in early February. And then once we've had those, the last quarter of the year will be end of year reporting. Particularly like getting the end of year reports in, because we include successes and challenges on those for local systems to tell us what they think has worked particularly well. And in many areas, they do include references to DFG. So please do link in with your Better Care Fund lead if you are not, or a Better Care Fund lead are not already here, and do include examples of DFG, because the DFG is part of the funding streams within the Better Care Fund, and we're always really keen to see how that money is being spent. And because we will be approaching a spending review, examples that you can give us in terms of DFG and how that's working in an integrated way, we will be proactively sharing that back with what is my parent department, DLUC, to say how that money is being used and the difference it's making, and the importance of that to really be stressed within in the spending review when government allocates money. So please do bear that in mind and seize that opportunity. Thank you all as well. Lots of you are registered on the Better Care Fund Exchange and sometimes engage with the forum. So that's great too. So please continue to do that. And if you'd like to join the exchange, then please just email the Better Care Fund team or Louise or myself, and we will make sure that you are registered to join that. But the big thing that we are working on at the moment, although we have a 2-year programme for Better Care Fund 2023-25, we are actually, for the first year, we're nearly at the end of, but the second year, 24-25, there is going to be an addendum to the overall policy framework and planning requirements, which the team and departments are currently working on at the moment. We had hoped to publish in earlier January. We're heading towards the end. At the moment, we're looking at publishing in hopefully early February. A few changes to what we're looking for, but the overall policy framework and planning requirements have already been agreed. But it's a lot of the allocations hadn't been set at the time of publication in 23, so the allocation of all mandatory funding contributions needed to be confirmed. There's a few revisions to some metrics. And of course, we've included from last year one around falls, which has a strong link to DFG as well in terms of supporting and preventing. Requirements for intermediate care and capacity and demand planning that some of you may also be involved with by way of the refresh that we asked for in Q2 in preparation for winter. And we know that our partners are particularly keen on seeing how impact and value for money is being demonstrated. So there's some revisions that will be published in the addendum to cover 24-25. And then we will be starting work on 25-26, for which we also need a spending review agreement to proceed with. So we are busily working on that. You haven't missed anything. It's not published yet. In terms of DFG, you may recall that it was announced last year that an extra 102 million would be going into 2 years. So 50 million has gone into 23-24 and 52 million will go into 24-25, which makes the grand total of 620 something, 25 million, I think it was. Let's have a look, quick check on my charts. Yeah, 625 million So, but I'm sure you would be telling me that with the increase of inflation and building costs, that doesn't mean to say that it necessarily goes a lot further. But anyway, there is an increase, and we're expecting that to be published in the grant conditions, the grant determination and grant conditions that are shared with you, and expecting those out about May from the department. So that is all underway, and then there will be a short planning round and then the assurance, which will conclude for the 24-25 element, and the reporting will be continued around that for the end of that year. So I think that's about it, apart from to say, Paul mentioned the road shows. I'm looking forward to joining the team in Plymouth at the end of February. So I think, and Louise popped up our email in the chat, so you've got that there if you aren't a member of the exchange and would like to be. So I think, Paul, that's about it from me.
Great, thank you, Jane. Good to have a good summary and overview of what's happening with the Better Care Fund. I think kind of the question everybody asks is always about when's the future funding going to be announced, but of course there's got to be a comprehensive spending review, hasn't there? And probably an election before that.
Yes.
Yeah, so kind of funding from next year, obviously depends on the election, and a spending review at some point. But yes, 625 million will be distributed in May, I believe. Yeah, great. Well, I know I've got to shoot off from the meeting, so thank you for joining us today, Jane. And yeah, look forward
Thank you
to
for inviting me.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
Okay, thank you, Jane. So we're now going to move on to Plymouth. We've just been talking about Plymouth. We've got Steve Evans joining us, who's the technical lead at Plymouth City Council. And Steve, I believe you've got a case study for us.
I have, yeah. Can I just check that you can see my screen before I start
Yep,
rambling?
there we go. There we go. I think that's all
okay,
running. So
over
to you, Steve.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the invite as well. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Paul and the team kindly reached out to ask if I'd be happy to do a bit of an overview or a case study of a bariatric case. So I wanted to just run through the sort of basics, background, costings, timeline, etc., of a case that we completed in Plymouth towards the end of last year. So client's name has obviously been changed, but for the purposes of today, gentleman's name is Jay. As you can see, has a history of obesity, currently weighing 39 stone, osteoarthritis, chronic type 2 respiratory failure, arterial fibrillation, and hypertension, and ongoing difficulties with reduced mobility and also chronic pain. Admitted to hospital in April 22 following acute kidney injury and pulmonary edema. Apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. I'm not an OT, and has been an inpatient since. And is currently relying on a high level of care and being hoisted between his bed, his armchair, and his commode. So has quite a very lacking in independence and personal freedom existence. But a really, really nice guy who was involved all the way through the case. Hasn't been able to stand and transfer since his admission, and also has no electric wheelchair. So obviously, independence and everything like that is really difficult. There were concerns about Jay returning to his first full flat, partly because of the logistics of getting him in and out, but also because of his weight and the need for equipment. As you can imagine, a 39 stone gentleman in an upstairs flat. Obviously, there were lots of issues which we also had to consider from a structural point of view with regards to the assistance that we were offering. Ambulance and fire service had also raised concerns around, yes, we could get Jay into the property, but that once he was in there, it would be really difficult, if not near impossible, for him to be independently mobile, and also to be able to get him out in the event of an emergency. So I've listed, it was a massive multidisciplinary effort for this case, much more so than I would say for what I might call a traditional or a standard DFG. As you can see there were probably lots of stakeholders and parties involved that we would normally see on any case. There are the obvious ones, but also there are, the care provider. So Paul is switching to a new care provider, the hoist installer, but also hospital transport. So we had to make sure that we could get Jay from the hospital to the new flat once it was ready to be occupied. Even from the housing association's point of view, we had the development manager, the operations manager, and the independent living officer. So we had all of those people involved from the housing association, which is more than we would normally expect. But because it is a shared scheme, independent living officer was crucial. And also because of the nature of the works that we were doing in turning a two-bed flat into one, because of the bariatric needs, that meant that we also had the housing operations manager for the Southwest from the HA, who was heavily involved in definitely in the obtaining consent process, but also as things moved along, because as you can imagine, there were, from the HA's point of view, there were cost implications in changing a 2-bed to a 1-bed, and obviously they needed that sort of future security, if you like, of what might happen with that unit if Jay had ever chosen to leave the unit. So we had the main contractor involved very early on in the process as well, which is quite tricky because we hadn't actually approved the works yet. So obviously that wasn't without its difficulties as well. From the NHS, we had the deputy head of specialist services and a second OT as well as our in-house housing OT, and we also had the ward manager who was aware of Jay and his needs, who had obviously known him for a considerable period of time. The DFG team, and then, like I said, we did have a structural engineer. Because of the bariatric needs, but also because we were looking at hoisting, and because 39 stone with equipment in a wheelchair is a considerable point load to be placed at any point within a property. So even though we were looking at a ground floor unit, concrete floor, to satisfy the housing association, we still did employ the services of a structural engineer throughout the case to make sure that everything was fine with regards to, firstly, the ability to install and use the hoist, but secondly, with regards to Jay being able to move around the property as well, and also wheelchair services. So the wheelchair and obviously sourcing that for Jay was a pivotal and really crucial part of the adaptation. So as much as we were already going ahead and talking about clear widths for doorways, which we were widening, it wasn't until further down the process that we were actually able to 100% source a wheelchair that would suit Jay. But and it was basically, as I understand it, the biggest wheelchair, widest wheelchair we could get in the country, but also it had to have an extension kit fitted to it as well. So obviously that was another massive consideration that we had with regards to the case. So with regards to the works themselves, what we were looking at simply was to make a 2-bed unit into a 1-bed unit. It was also a live building all the way through, so we had to work very closely and thoroughly with the contractor, firstly around the obvious things like dust, noise and vibration, but also because within the development there are lots of social events and they have meal times, etc. The contractor had to be sympathetic of that and work with the independent living officer and the development manager around making sure that, knocking down walls and and breaking into concrete floors, etc., that was all done at suitable times of the day, which obviously that introduces its own logistical issues as well. And we were also widening the main door into the actual unit that Jay was going to be occupying. So that meant that we've got a live corridor where we need a suitable and safe working area, firstly for the contractors to knock the existing door out and widen it in order to put the new door in, but also so that we maintained emergency access, but also routine access for any resident within the property. And then a further complication was that there was a wheelchair user further down the corridor. So obviously that had to all be considered as part of the works and the logistics of the programme of works. We were also widening the paved area to a communal courtyard, which meant that Jay was able to access an external space. And like I said, we removed the wall between the 2 bedrooms, which obviously that includes radiators, light switches, etc., plug sockets. All of those were then relocated in order that we had a suitable position for Jay's bariatric bed, but also a chair commode, and then allowing space for manual handling as well. And then in addition to that, we were installing a twin motor ceiling track hoist between the bedroom and the living room. So just so that you've seen them, these are the early sketches. So hopefully you can see my cursor, but if you can't, on the left-hand side, we've got the existing as it was layout of the unit. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got the living room and kitchen. Bottom right, we've got the bathroom, and then we've got bedroom 1, bedroom 2. And then the hallway that you come into, which is the main door into Jay's flat. What we were proposing and what we did was that the main door into the unit, the door into the living room, the door into the bedroom, and one of the doors into the bathroom, because obviously there's 2 doors, was widened. And then you can see effectively we've removed the dividing wall between the 2 bedrooms, maintained windows, and then we've put a door on an angle so that we could get the clear width that we needed to get in order for Jay and carers to be able to get in and out of the property. And then from the living room, you can see there's a folding door there, so we've got access to an external courtyard space. With regards to the timeline, so I've given a sort of basic timeline there, and what I've done is highlighted as DFG officers the ones that we might be really keen to focus on. So October, we received the referral, valid application November. April, we were able to approve the case. PCC commissioning were able to help us because the HA were concerned that firstly the property was empty, and that obviously if we were earmarking a resident to move in, that obviously somebody needed to cover the rent, but also they were looking at obviously the DFG wouldn't go back and revert it back to a 2-bed unit. So what commissioning have done is basically signed up to an agreement that either, if it's not required for any of the tenant after Jay vacates, if he ever does, then commissioning would pay to revert it back to a 2-bed, or that basically they have first call on it and able to move a current bariatric client into that property as well. So there is an element of future proofing and that goes on, but obviously the HA needed that assurance as part of their consent process, which obviously made it a bit more drawn out to be able to get that consent. You can see going through June, lots and lots of meetings going on all the way through here. You can see we had the initial multidisciplinary team meeting in December 22, which was most of, not quite all, but most of the parties that I'd listed in the list previously. And then in June, we were already having meetings to confirm things like care provision, equipment, from moving Jay from the hospital to the new flat, and then commode, bed, hoist, transport, hospital transport, etc. And then July last year started on site and then completed on site in August last year. So the ones that I've highlighted in bold are basically referral, valid application, approval, and then works completed, which are the ones that we tend to be more focused on from a DFG point of view. I've done some photos of the property post adaptation. So the one on the left you can see, so that is looking from the sort of lobby area back towards the main entrance. So we did also automate the doors within the property, which then as Jay is in his wheelchair, that will move him back towards being a bit more independent. So you can see that there's a nice big silver push button on there so that he can either exit the property alone. There's also a tannoy system so that if he's got a visitor, that obviously he's in control of who comes into the unit, etc. The next photo along the second one shows from the living room looking back towards the bedroom, so you can see how open plan it's made with the hoist above, and also on the left the door out to the communal garden area outside the property. So very, very light. You can see the sunshine pouring in through there for the client, which was amazing. The third photo is the hoist in the bedroom. Obviously this is all pre the final bits of equipment going in. And then the fourth one is looking from the bedroom back into the living room. And the last photo on the right there is looking back towards the kitchen. So at present, we hadn't adapted the bathroom and we also hadn't adapted the kitchen because at the moment there isn't the need to do that. But there is a hopefully a strong expectation that we will be going back to do that in the future as part of the client's move back towards independence. So lots of people would probably be interested in the cost. So those are the costs that we had. So you can see just over 62,000 for the total cost of works. It's really easy to look at it and think, well, it's just knocking down a wall and widening a few doorways. Obviously, there was the automation, there was the bits that we had to do to satisfy the fire department. There were other sort of little bits of mechanical and electrical works in there, which is obviously why the figure is 45k. We were always aware that we are removing somebody from a hospital setting. and for for the client's own independence and well-being, that is a massive step forward, having been in there for a year or two. But also it means that there's a bed freed up for somebody else to move in, and the 45k in NHS budget is is minimal anyway. So just over 60,000 pound total cost of works. Funding was a 30k DFG maxed out, a discretionary full allowance under our independent living policy of 20k, and then we had 12,200 plus any agreed extras and unforeseen works. That was all covered by the NHS. So we'd obviously maxed out our DFG. We'd also maxed out our discretionary in order to basically carry out the works. So I wanted to do just a couple of lessons learned. It was a really successful adaptation, but as always, we did meet afterwards just to sort of see, firstly, that we know that there will be repeats of this case. There are other people with similar needs that are in long-term healthcare and hospital settings, and we're really keen to help them to obviously move back and start to become a bit more independent. The HA consent, we definitely realised that you request that as early in the process as possible. That's the reason that we involved the local area managers for the housing association. There was some back and forth, but we were able to get to a point where we had firstly consent in principle, and then also further down the line obviously received that detailed consent as well, which was amazing news. Ensure funding streams are in place. There are lots of conversations around this of we go ahead and we say, right, this is what the need is, this is how we can meet the need, and then a bit further down the line you talk about how much is it going to cost, and then you start to talk about where is the money going to come from. So we tried to be as realistic as possible about the costs, but obviously with with COVID and with Brexit and lots of other things that are going on with the economy, the costs were really difficult to predict. All we could do is go into it and go, actually, we're committed, we will get to a certain point, discretionary DFG, and then obviously look at what the balance is, and then speak to parties around getting that additional funding. Who needs to be consulted, who needs to be involved, and who needs to be present at meetings, and I've put in brackets there, these can be very, very different. So we never had all of those people in that list around one table. What we did do was focus on the core of attendees, and then you rely on, for example, we might have been staying in contact with the hoist installer and with the main contractor early on, and then bring them in effectively once we're at a point of, talking about, right, this is when we're looking at a start date, once we've got detailed consent for the works. Bring in a main contractor as soon as possible. Like I said, that they are key to the process, and also we were lucky, our main contractor worked very closely with the hoist installer and with the structural engineer and with building control, which meant it went through really, really smoothly. And the final thing that we did realize is actually, when you look at it, not the cost of it, but when you look at logistically the amount of bits that we had to tick, it is easily to be daunted. But we did say as a project team, the same as smaller works, the same principles still apply. It's just that the amount of works and the amount of people around the table are just that little bit higher. So try not to be put off by the fact that it is a more complex case. So moving forward, Jay did have a guard of honor, an improvised guard of honor when he left the hospital, which was amazing to see. I've seen the video of it. It's incredible. With the healthcare staff waving their woggles, leg lifters, grabbers, walking stick and a tennis racket. Obviously he'd become part of the furniture and, a really likable character. So, but at the same time, I have spoken to him since he's moved out. And he's obviously, loving the fact that, he's got that next level of independence, if you like, and that he's got his own space. So going forward, the hope is that we will be looking at a bathroom and kitchen adaptation in the future to help Jay to maintain his personal hygiene, and then also be able to prepare meals and snacks for himself. And the last time I spoke to him was the end of last year, just before Christmas, and that he'd said he was settling in and that he was doing really well. I'll jump back out in case there are any questions, because I haven't seen the chat.
Right, thanks, Steve. Really interesting case. So, kind of in terms of the structural work, how much needed to be how much needed to be done to the building? I'm presuming mostly for the hoists and kind of making sure that they were secure and safe.
Very little, actually. The structural engineer's involvement, Paul, was more around satisfying the housing association. The fact that somebody had raised, we've got a 39 stone gentleman in a wheelchair that's going to be moved around, with a concrete floor. So there was very little. It was the structural engineer's input was more around the widening of the doorways to make sure that the lintels and that the structure above that were designed and they were suitable. Apart from that, it was checking the as-built drawings for the scheme itself to make sure that the hoist, and then recommending fixings to the hoist and linking in with the hoist installer. So there wasn't anything preparatory or anything remedial that we needed to do to the actual floor of the property itself.
Okay. And did you have any trouble finding kind of suitable equipment like hoists? For the
Not
weight limit?
hoist, we didn't. No, not hoist, we didn't. I mean, you know, Hillrom, where they're a reputable hoist installer anyway. They were the ones that did the hoist installation for this case. So no, there absolutely wasn't an issue with providing a hoist. No, twin motor, absolutely fine. Obviously, operating up to a safe working load. Obviously, it's always that dilemma of where is the weight now and how is it going to progress. Obviously, if it's going to keep increasing, then obviously there's an issue. But the expectation is always that Jay will be able to get into that space where, with weight management and with personal choices, obviously that weight starts to come down, and then obviously that makes life easier going forward. And then hopefully we move towards a bathroom and a kitchen adaptation.
Yeah, and presumably having that kind of facility should hopefully make that kind of lifestyle management much easier going forwards for him.
Absolutely. Yeah. A massive psychological benefit of actually being out of a healthcare setting and effectively into his own space. That was something, that he was really keen. And a lot of towards the end, the focus was around where will my fridge go and where can I put a kettle? So, for me, that's brilliant because that's the sort of things that lots of us, focus on when we move house. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions on the chat. So could you view separate DFGs for different purposes to allow more funding, i.e. access to bedroom, access to outside space? And was this kind of scheme funded limited, I guess, is the question, or was everything that needed to be done for the time being? And
everything was done that needed to be done for the time being. Yeah, it's always that dilemma, isn't it? Where you go, it's really tricky when you go, you welcome one for each individual need, against the fact that obviously we're always monitoring our budget and looking at helping as many people as possible. If I'm honest, I wouldn't have estimated it would have been 45 50k for the building works and the hoist, or 60. I would have probably said it would have been a bit less than that, but I think therein lies the dilemma for a lot of us grants officers, is trying to predict what the costs are. And sometimes you rely on your historic knowledge and your knowledge base, but sometimes they can be a little bit out. So no, we didn't plan to look at it as different needs, and obviously it's all worked out fine.
Yeah. And Sue was asking about the bathroom. Are there kind of plans on how that will be adapted?
There are already. Yeah, there are already. Yeah, we've already widened the door into it, Sue, and that we've already had conversations around the size of the tray, potentially looking at a shower toilet as well. So yeah, that was one of the things we needed to make sure, because what we didn't want to do was go in and make it one bedroom and then find that in the future for Jay we would have to increase the size of the bathroom. So the bathroom is already there, and that obviously when he is at that point we will be able to hoist into the bathroom as a first provision, but we will be able to look at putting in a level shower and toilet and everything as well.
Great. Steve was asking about do you know kind of how much social care will potentially be saving through having those adaptations done?
I'm really sorry, Stephen. I don't know off the top of my head. I did try and get in contact with the hospital for the last couple of days, and it's proved very tricky. I tried to look up on sort of some of the central government figures of what they say. I think some of them for like critical care they say around £1,800 a day, which if you take that over a year or two, I think I worked it out as a year, it's about 600 grand or something. But please don't quote me on that. Obviously, I've chosen to focus more on the individuals, the benefits for the individual rather than the costings of it. So no, I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Yes, but even I suppose on a fairly conservative £700 a day, it's not going to take many days, is it?
No, exactly. And if you said £700 a day, you're probably looking at 300 grand a year, and that's this year and next year and the year after and the year after. And it's cost the NHS effectively the top up bit of money on top of the discretionary.
Yeah. There was a couple of questions about NHS funding, and kind of Kelly's mentioned that they've achieved that ever in West Sussex. So
Yeah.
what's the secret of your success in terms of getting the NHS involved?
Don't know. Nice eyelashes, possibly. I don't know. I really, I really don't know. I think, in all seriousness, it was a massive team effort. Obviously, if we'd have had our choice, we'd have put in less discretionary, and then it would have been topped up even more. But that's what the DFG is there for. That's what our policy is there for. And obviously, we've luckily had senior manager approval to be able to do that. There isn't any secret apart from it was it was a case that was brought to us by commissioning around somebody that was in a long-term healthcare setting. We've had those ongoing conversations, and it's come to a point where we're talking about costs. And then obviously the request has gone in and it's been approved. So I don't have any magic wand or passphrase or anything like that, I'm sorry to say.
And Charlotte had done the question too, but basically there isn't really any minimum timescale.
No,
between one
not
DFG
at all.
and
No,
the other.
not at all. And if I'm honest, Charlotte, for any client, it's always really tricky. And I know OTs, do get a bit of slack sometimes. But if for this particular case we completed it towards the end of last year, August, September, if it had come back in early this year and went, actually, this is the way that Jay is going, we need to consider a bathroom, then absolutely, that's what we should be doing. Like Paul said, there isn't a timescale between the previous DFG and the next one. It's always remarkably hard for OTs, and they have my utmost respect for adult cases, but definitely for children's cases, trying to predict needs can be really hard, sometimes impossible. So I've been in PCC for about 14 years. We have had clients that have come back 4 or 5 times, through the same process for varying needs. So yeah. Great.
Thanks, Steve. And thank you for mentioning the difficulty of children's cases. That segues perfectly into our next slide. but thank you for that, Steve. Thank you for presenting the case. And yeah, look forward to seeing you when we come down to Plymouth next month.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
Foundations Live.
Now I'll welcome Rachel Russell, who's with that nice introduction from Steve on how difficult children's cases can be. I will hand over to Rachel, who's going to give some very exciting news about something we're going to do a little bit later this year.
Right. Lovely. Hopefully everybody can see my slide. Yeah, it's just we're obviously today formally announcing and launching the dates of this year's DFG Summit, which will be on the 27th of June and in Birmingham. Just really want to talk about why we did the first summit last year, but why we are now doing, hopefully this is going to be a regular thing. But just to kind of talk a little bit about why we do summit. Obviously at Foundations, we provide lots of opportunity for networking, bringing together practitioners, managers, commissioners. Obviously we do that through the roadshows. Obviously doing sessions and webinars such as we're doing today is that opportunity to bring the sector together. Although they're fantastic opportunities to bring the sector together, what is often difficult in those formats and through the roadshows is really to discuss the real world issues that we often experience in the sector in terms of delivering the DFG. So the summit, and this is a definition of what a summit is that opportunity to bring together the leaders within the sector. And at Foundations, I know this sounds a bit twee, but as at Foundation, we do believe that everybody that's involved in the DFG delivery, from a strategic through to an operational practitioner perspective, have all got that potential to influence change, and therefore, have got that potential to be leaders. So that summit is just that opportunity to bring together managers, practitioners, commissioners, people from the third sector who are working with people with lived experience who use the DFG to support their health and well-being, to actually come together to discuss a particular issue around the delivery of the DFG, so that hopefully through collaboration, through those discussions, we can go away, certainly at Foundations, and take forward some of the action that we can do to hopefully address the issues that we discuss in the summit. So just to give you a quick overview of the success of last year's summit. So again, it was in June, it was in Birmingham, and we had, I think it was around 120 practitioners. So there was technical officers, caseworkers, occupational therapists, we had commissioners, we had strategic and operational managers, and we had representatives from the third sector representing people with lived experience. The discussion point at the summit last year, apologies for those who attended, was around people like Robert. So the people with relatively simple needs, but tend to be the people that sit waiting for that assessment that leads to a DFG. So what we wanted to do, based on the work of Adaptations Without Delay, was actually bring together the sector, bring together those people that were interested in this issue to look at how we could move the agenda forward, so to provide that ease of access to assessments for people like Robert with those relatively simple needs, who tend to be the individuals waiting the longest. So the day was split into two. We had some expert speakers, experts in the subject. So we have Vicky McCall, who's an academic who does lots of research around adaptations. We had Lauren Walker from an occupational therapy perspective from the Royal College of OT. Obviously myself, obviously from Foundations, but obviously being one of the authors of Adaptations Without Delay. And we also have Vicky Gale, who was the journalist who worked, I think it was probably about 18 months ago now, worked on the Channel 4 news expose around DFG waits. So those expert speakers kind of generated the call for action, really, exposed the issues around people waiting and set the scene. We then had 6 workshops where we explored opportunities for improving ease of access, looking at opportunities, challenges, and potential barriers, and what we could do to overcome those barriers to provide much more easier access. So we had a workshop around self and remote assessment, the role of manufacturers in the assessment process. We had a session around trusted assessor model and how you make that work really well. We had a session around the complexity around needs versus necessity. We had a session around mop-up assessment services, and also whether we needed to look at how we define consultation between local authority, well, between social care and housing. So that was the summit. As I said, there's about 125, 130 people that attended. Really fantastic debate, really good networking. So what have we done following the summit, just to show that we just don't do these events and don't do anything with what we find? We have started to make some really positive moves forward. So I'm working with the Royal College specialist section of housing to look at how we can make occupational therapists feel much more comfortable when they're not involved in the more simpler DFGs. Obviously, OTs are a registered profession, so there are some issues around assessment and obviously involving others in that process. In terms of one of the findings from the summit was this need and recognition that we need more resources to make to provide a more proportionate response, and how we do that through the trusted assess process. And we have actually been working with 2 students from Salford University who have helped us develop a new competency framework based on Adaptations Without Delay that looks at the skills and knowledge that we require for those 3 types of complexity, so universal, targeted and specialist. And later this year we'll have some more exciting news around how we're taking that new competency framework forward around trusted assessors. We identified that manufacturers potentially have got a positive role and could reduce some of the demands on social care around assessment. So hopefully this year we'll be starting some work with manufacturers and suppliers around how we can ensure that if we're going to do that, we can do that in an ethical way, and we've got some quality standards to support that if we're going to make that work. We discussed the need for support to help local authorities to work different. So looking at how we collaborate between social care and housing. And obviously, as regional advisors, we continue the work that we do with local authorities, supporting local authorities to work in that much more collaborative way. And obviously, we'll continue to do that. The other thing that came out of the summit was this idea around pathways to consultation, again, based on complexity, and having a visual tool that helps local authorities to look at, based on complexity, how we can have those different pathways to consultation, perhaps where we don't need individuals who just want to apply for DFG to necessarily have to go through the social care route where that may not necessarily be appropriate. So again, we're just finishing off a visual consultation pathway based on complexity, and hopefully we'll be updating our webpage guide on Assess a DFG to include that visual tool on different ways in which local authorities could approach consultation. So that's just a little bit of an update around that we haven't just sat on the information that we gathered at the summit, and then we are pushing things forward and supporting the sector around those individuals with simple needs. Have I stopped my presentation, Paul?
Oh, you got some more? I'd stopped it.
I did, Paul. Yes, I'm talking
Let me bring
about.
it back. Let me bring it back.
Is that a hint?
No,
Speed it up.
carry on.
Right, okay,
Carry on.
really quickly. So that's what we've done this year. So the theme for this year is children. The reason that we have chosen this topic, and hopefully this is good news for everybody that's here today, is as regional advisors, and we also did a bit of a poll on our DFG Champions Facebook page around kind of issues that we could look at for the summit, and children did come up. And as I say, as a team of 5 regional advisors, a significant number of our calls are around children. This here are just kind of 6 issues or 7 issues that we frequently deal with as regional advisors, working with local authorities, HIAs, adaptation services. So it's about, how do we make good decisions where, there's need for additional space, particularly where the property is deemed overcrowded. Get lots of questions around how do we ensure good practice, so we're not taking we are taking the least restrictive approach when we're designing adaptations. How do we cope with the issues where perhaps we might be using the DFG and the provision of adaptations as a bit of a sticking plaster that should be being addressed by other parts of the system, such as education, health and social care. Kind of what's already been mentioned today, the thorny issue around children's cases don't always necessarily fit nicely within the 12 purposes for which you can use a DFG. Often they go above the mandatory DFG. So actually, how do we cope with and develop good practice and funding mechanisms within housing and social care to fund these high cost adaptations? Get lots of questions about how do we ensure that we've got really good practice in terms of those children that are transitioning from children's into adult services. Probably could do a whole summit on the next subject. And again, get lots of questions and queries around access to gardens and other purposes, and around actually what is necessary and appropriate. As I think, as Steve said it really well in the last presentation, it's about, you want to be fair to the applicant that you've got in front of you, but you also want to be fair to everybody else in your local authority who might need to use a DFG. And then the whole issue around rehousing versus adapting, working with housing association, ensuring that they're making best use of the stock, and how do you get that decision right for both the family, housing providers and the grant system. So that's why we are doing the summit, because it's about bringing you together, bringing the sector together to look at how we can take forwards, look at those issues and take forward some solutions that we can take forward at Foundations. So who should attend? Very quickly: technical officers, caseworkers, occupational therapists, any other practitioners that have got an interest around children's cases. We want operational strategic managers from across housing, health and social care. Again, we want commissioners, those people who can influence the money side of things and the commissioning of services. And then obviously third sector organisations that support those that with lived experience who need to access the DFG. Just really quickly, I won't go into this, but this is the format for the day. So there'll be another, we'll have a start of the day, we'll be getting together those experts that call for action. And then the idea is we'll have less workshops this year. We will repeat them. Some feedback that we got was that people wanted to attend more of the sessions, so it's likely we'll repeat them. And currently we've got these 4 themes: so necessary and appropriate, funding decisions, transition, and the role of technology. That might change a little bit as we kind of firm up the speakers, as we firm up obviously the content for those workshops, but those are the ideas that we've got since 6 months out from the actual event. As I say, it'll be an opportunity for networking. There will be hopefully space for around 150 delegates, and the date is again the 27th of June, and it will be at the Birmingham Conference and Event Centre, which is just a couple of minutes from New Street Station by foot. And you'll be glad to know, Paul, that is it. Just to say, watch this space over the next 3 or 4 months. We will be providing lots more information, etc., etc. There you go, Paul.
Right, thank you, Rick.
That's
I must have to remove it now.
You can take it off. You're all right.
So, yeah, lots of exciting stuff coming up. I suppose look out for the Foundation's newsletter for tickets, which will go on sale sometime next month. So we're just finalising all the details at the moment. But yeah, tickets on sale for the summit sometime in February. Great. I don't think there was any questions or comments. I'll just say that's hot off the press news for viewers of the First Foundations Live. So yeah, I'm sure we'll be ringing you back on the run-up, Rachel, to give some more details and expand on the content. Great, thank you very much.
Foundations Live.
Right, to round off the afternoon then, what I wanted to do was go through DFG decision making, and it's been mentioned a couple of times today, but just wanted to go through with you how you'd make a robust DFG decision, because what things that we often get asked are, can I give a DFG for this, can I give a DFG for that? And it's kind of really difficult to say just based on that kind of thing. And I'll move myself out the way so you can see this. The existence of mandatory grants is extremely rare, and that rarity illustrates that the mindset of the decision-making authority must not be to search for grounds to refuse the grant, but in good faith to limit examination to the relevant matters. So this was from a case which I'll be talking about in a few minutes' time. But basically what the judge said was mandatory grants are very precious, and if you possibly can, you should be trying to say yes. But sometimes you do have to say no, because not everything somebody applies for is going to be relevant for a DFG. So I'm going to go through a little bit of case law, looking at how to make a decision on your DFGs. And this was the first case, which is called Should I Stay or Should I Go, which was a case from Islington in London. This isn't the actual property, but I've been told it looks fairly similar to the property involved. And it involved a Mrs. McEwen, who was an amputee, and she needed to get in and out of this kind of property down these steps that you can see on the screen here. And her sons were kind of carrying her up and down in a wheelchair to get her in and out of the property. and she applied to Islington Council for a grant to construct a pad and have a platform lift installed on the kind of the edge of the pavement here, so she could then get up and down from the pavement into the property itself. And Islington refused the grant application. So what Islington said was, when Mrs McEwen applied for this grant, was that, and she's a council tenant, and they said that there are alternative properties available that Mrs McEwen can move to. I think it was only about a mile or so away. They said it wasn't reasonable and practicable to provide the lift, partly because of the cost of it. And they also said that the rest of the property wouldn't be suitable, that kind of access to the bedroom and the bathroom, actually, once you got inside the property, was still going to be quite problematic. So they refused the grant on that basis. Mrs McEwen then applied for judicial review. So kind of the first issue was, well, can you refuse to adapt and suggest a move instead? And what the judge said was, well, it's definitely good practice to have that conversation and to look at the alternatives that may be a better outcome for people. But you can't refuse a valid DFG application just because you, as the local authority, think that there is a better option out there if the applicant disagrees. That's from a DFG perspective. What unfortunately Islington didn't test was whether, as a social landlord, they could withhold permissions for the adaptations, as they believe it's not best use of their stock. Islington didn't mention that in the case, but clearly what the judge said was that from a DFG perspective, and in this case Islington was both the DFG decision maker and the landlord, was that from a DFG perspective, you can't refuse a grant just because you think there's somebody better, somewhere better that somebody can move to. And then they started looking at the eligible works, and particularly the bit about reasonable and practicable. And hopefully you already know, I'll go through in a minute, that there are kind of two stages to a DFG test for eligible works. First is, do the works meet the purposes, which I will go through in a second, which is a fairly objective assessment. And then, are those works necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable, which is a bit more subjective, which always depends on the individual circumstances. So you do have to follow this process if you're going to make a robust decision. What I've come up with is this kind of diagram to hopefully try and explain to you how it works. So across the top there, we have the 12 purposes for which a grant must be approved. So things like access to the home, access to a bath, access to wash basin, through to better heating and cooking, making the home safer, and access to the garden. So for a grant to be approved, or for works to be approved for a grant, the adaptations you're proposing must meet one of those purposes. Then you look at whether it's necessary and appropriate, reasonable and practicable, and if it all is, then you get your eligible work. Your proposed works turns into your eligible work. So for this case, we had proposed works of a step lift, and I've used a basketball analogy here. So proposed step lift, does it meet the purpose of providing access to the home? I think based on fairly straightforward assessment of that, a step lift meets the purpose of being access to a home. So usually that purpose bit's a slam dunk. That's the basketball analogy for you. But then, in this case, is the step lift then necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable? And if you remember, Islington said it wasn't reasonable and practicable. But in terms of this case, and this was one of the key points of this case, what the judge said was that when you're assessing necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable, you can only take into account things associated with the purpose that you're examining. So in this case, when you're assessing whether it's necessary and appropriate, reasonable and practicable in terms of access to the home, you can't consider access to the shower, can't consider access to the toilet, can't consider access to the bedroom when you're making this decision. So when Islington said that the rest of the home wasn't suitable for her in terms of access to those facilities, the judge said that didn't matter. You can only judge necessary and appropriate, reasonable, practicable in relation to the particular purpose that you're looking at. And in this case, it was access to the home. So we'll come back to the reasonable and practical bit in a second when I've been through this second case. And this was from Redbridge, and it was a tale of two lifts. So it was an adult son who still lived with his parents, profoundly disabled, had a number of adaptations over the years, and had a through-floor lift to get access to his bedroom and shower room, which were on the first floor. Had a few through-floor lifts, and a few years ago one had broken down. They'd had it replaced, and the new one wasn't as reliable as previous ones, and a few times it had been broken down. And to get him back upstairs, they'd rolled him up in a duvet and kind of dragged him up the stairs to get him back to his bedroom and shower room, which obviously isn't very suitable. And what they'd asked for was a stair lift to act as a backup in any situations where the through-floor lift broke down in the future. So a health OT went in and did their assessment and said it was necessary and appropriate for a stair lift provided as a backup to the through-floor lift in case it breaks down. The application on that basis went to Redbridge Council, who refused the application from the Gulreses based on they said they can only provide one item of equipment, and that's per purpose, and they've already had a through-floor lift and access the bedroom, so that's that one piece of equipment ticked off. They said that a warranty and service plan were a suitable alternative to the stair lift and be a provision in case of breakdown. And they said on that basis it wasn't reasonable and practicable to award a DFG for a stair lift. And the family applied for judicial review to challenge that decision. So again, so this is kind of getting onto the crux of necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable in terms of deciding the eligible works. And this is directly from the legislation that the Housing Authority should look at whether they're satisfied that the relevant works, so in this case the stair lift, was necessary and appropriate and that it's reasonable and practical to carry out the works. But they didn't take into account this bit. So the reasonable and practical part of the test only has regard to the age and condition of the dwelling. So the dwelling in this case was perfectly satisfactory condition. So they couldn't say it wasn't reasonable and practical to carry out the works because there wasn't any issue with the age and condition of the dwelling. They'd accepted the health OT's view that it was necessary and appropriate to have the stair lift. And so obviously their decision to not award the grant based on reasonable and practicable was found to be wrong. And so the judicial review was granted. So I think this, and I think this is fairly common held belief, that social care or the OT decides what is necessary and appropriate, and housing or the grants officer decides what's reasonable and practicable in terms of common custom and practice with DFGs. And what this case is clearly saying is that that's not correct. Where the decision making actually happens is that housing, it's kind of housing or the grants officer's decision on what is necessary and appropriate, and the OT or social care are the consultee in that process. And on the reasonable and practical element of the decision, in the vast majority of cases where the house isn't falling down, is pretty much irrelevant. So just bring me back to one of my hobby horses on why social services still do have panel meetings for DFGs, or panel meetings in any case. Actually, this is from the Care Act guidance, which said that panels shouldn't be used for routine decisions. And if you consider that social care is only a consultee on DFG. I don't see there's any reason why there should be panels for DFGs. You may have meetings around complex cases, but routine panels should be a thing of the past. So if reasonable and practicable isn't a key element of making a decision on what is appropriate to approve for a DFG, then we do need to think about necessary and appropriate a little bit more. So these are the guiding principles that came from some work that Francis Hayward did about 20 years ago that we included in the DFG guidance that came out 2 years ago now. But what we felt was kind of on the basis of the Redbridge case that we needed to take this on another step. And for any occupational therapists that are watching, I'm sure you'll be aware of the person, environment, occupation PEO model, which not an OT, which I won't go on to explain, but we kind of looked at that and started to look at how we could use it to develop a more objective and useful assessment tool for what is necessary and appropriate for a DFG. Looking at things like bodily functions, roles and routines, values and beliefs, physical environment, economic issues, social and cultural issues, and things that are due to a disability, considering the alternatives and thinking in the long term. So that led us on to this framework in terms of how to make a decision on what is necessary and appropriate on any individual DFG application. And the intention with this isn't that it's a kind of tick box exercise. The idea with this is it gives you a range of kind of categories and considerations that you would think about when you're looking at whether an adaptation or application is necessary and appropriate. So looking at whether it's necessary due to disability, whether there are suitable alternatives that are available. As we saw with the earlier case, moving somewhere else may not necessarily be a reason to refuse a grant, but there may be other alternatives. So in the other case, providing a warranty and a service plan may be considered a suitable alternative and necessary and appropriate to providing that second lift. Looking at whether it's long-term and a sustainable solution, so the third part of the necessary element. And then look at whether it's appropriate to the person in terms of body functions, roles and routines, values and beliefs, and whether it's appropriate to the environment or kind of property. So it's minimising barriers to independence in and around the home, reducing care costs, which is kind of the economic element, and that it will meet the social and cultural needs of the family. So, as I say, it's not designed to be a checkbox. It's a list of factors to be considered when you come to a judgment on these cases. So if we go back to the two cases we've looked at and kind of run through the decision-making process, again, thinking about this, this new tool, I think in terms of the step lift, thinking about the considerations in terms of necessary and appropriate, I think you probably tick all of those boxes. It's a tick box exercise, but having a platform lift probably is necessary and appropriate based on that set of criteria. So proposed step lift is the slam dunk in terms of meeting access to the home. And then if we're solely looking at access to the home and we're considering necessary and appropriate, then the stair lift, the basketball, will then pass that test and go into your basket of eligible works.
Our survey said.
But still on the understanding that the landlord, in that case Islington, could have said, no, it's not a suitable use of our stock. As the landlord potentially, but that wasn't covered in the case law. And then kind of thinking about the through-floor lift, stair lift case, I think kind of looking at suitable alternatives, probably the warranty and the the service plan are potentially better alternatives to meet the need that can be done safely. So the stair lift, and the judge kind of did look at the stair lift as making the home safer rather than kind of access to the bedroom because it was already an existing lift. So having the stair lift as a backup and not having the son dragged upstairs in a duvet I think you can fairly objectively say that will make the home safer. But because there is an alternative solution that might be better, it's not necessarily necessary and appropriate to do, particularly in terms of just looking at making the home safer. So that application doesn't necessarily proceed on the basis of it not being necessary and appropriate. So I hope that gives you a bit more of an overview on how you can use that new kind of tool and decision-making framework to make better decisions around some of the more kind of complex DFG applications that you might see. And if you go to the DFG decisions guide on our website, we've published a decision-making tool where you can see all the details of that decision framework I just shared with you in a handy format that you could use for particular cases. Download that as a PDF and test it out for any new case you come up with. Really be interested to hear how that works for you and get some feedback on how you're finding it on particular cases. So yeah, please do go and download that, and we'd love to hear what you think of it.
Foundations Live.
So thank you for joining us for our first ever Foundations Live. Thank you to Steve, Jane, and Rachel for joining me as well to present today. Hopefully you found that quite enjoyable. I enjoyed the last hour or so, and hopefully enjoyed the new format as well. I think gives us a lot more flexibility to do things a lot better. And kind of part of it is that we'll get much better videos at the back of it so that we can kind of share with you afterwards. As always, they're always available on our YouTube channel and on the Foundations website a little bit after the event. Coming soon, we do have, as I mentioned earlier, we definitely have roadshows coming up. So there's all the dates of the upcoming roadshows. Wait lists are open for all of them apart from Newcastle. A few tickets left for Newcastle, but if you'd like to attend any, we'll try and get as many extra people in as we can. So you can find all the details on the Foundations website to attend the roadshows. As Rachel mentioned, we'll also have the summit coming on the 27th of June, if you want to pop that date in your diary. And we've got more Foundations Live events coming up. Next one's in March. So good to see you all. As I said, we're the national body for DFGs and HAs, funded by the Department of Levelling Up Housing Communities. And we're here to support you with your work around any of those issues. So if you need anything from us, you know where we are, never too far away. And yeah, hope you enjoyed today, and we'll be back very soon with another Foundations Live. Thank you.